Welcome to our Adventure Expert series, where we invite you to sit down with us as we discuss adventure, travel and alternative living with people who are actually living this lifestyle.
These longer format videos, which are also going to be available in podcasts, are designed for you to sit with us and other adventure experts where we discuss stories and advice and hopefully inspire you to do your own adventure.
Today, we'll be sitting down with Aidan Klimenko. Now, I'm going to let him introduce himself because he'll do a much better job than I can. But the topic for discussion is borders, bandits, and the boys in blue. How did we cross borders? What troubles did we run into? How did we stay safe away from the bandits whilst living in our van on the streets? And how did we deal with corruption and bribes from the police? This is a subject which will be on the minds of anybody that's about to embark on their own adventure.
And guys, while you're watching this, please feel free to give us your stories and advice so we can share it with the community, because this is what it's all about.
That's right.
Enjoy.
Aidan Klimenko.
Yeah.
Nice to have you on the podcast, although we are actually doing this in your van, which is a pleasure to be in Otis himself.
Yeah, I'm excited to actually be moving instead of broken down.
Yeah,
So,
I feel your pain, brother.
yeah, I know.
Yeah, we're both road warriors. Both of us have lived for a long period of time in vans.
Mm-hmm.
Both of us have travelled south of the border.
Mm-hmm.
So today we're going to talk about borders, bandits, and the boys in blue. Basically, everybody's worst nightmare, the concerns that people have about
Right.
going across the border,
Yeah.
and how we've dealt with it, and some of the stories of the encounters with the police, or how like some difficult border crossings, or even like the odd occasion when we've run into trouble with the less desirable members of society. But before we get into that,
You should introduce yourself and what you've done. Why were you in South America living in a van?
So,
Yeah, we wanna know.
let's see. It was, I guess, at this point, two and a half years ago that me and three friends loaded up our van and drove down to South America to kind of just explore, to travel around and do photography stuff. And that was great. The van broke down after a while, which was tough, but we figured it out, continued to travel a little bit, but we ran out of money ultimately. So
that happens.
yeah, that was tough, trying to figure out how to continue doing what we really wanted to do, but really not having the financial means of doing that, you know. The nice thing about having a van is no matter how much money you have, you always have somewhere to sleep.
You have a home to go to, yeah.
Or
So how long were you there for?
Let's see, it was a year total,
Yeah.
from when we left to when we came back.
Okay, so you got a lot of experience living in a van in
Yeah,
South America.
absolutely.
So a lot of people are wanting to do that trip down to South America, and a lot of people are scared about doing it and have a lot of concerns. So
Sure.
we're going to talk about what they are and how you overcome them and
Totally.
all that stuff.
Totally. Cool.
People might know you from like the first project. Some of the people listening might have heard of your
Sure.
previous project.
Yeah, Vanajeros.
Vanajeros, the one and
Yeah.
only. That was a really cool project. Very
Yeah.
inspiring. We were following it. We don't get a lot of opportunity to follow other travellers because we're travelling so much ourselves and creating content ourselves. But yeah, you guys are definitely.
The cool thing is, when I was getting ready for that trip, leading up to it, I was watching your videos. I had just had a surgery on my shoulder that had me bed rested for months before leading up to the trip, which was good because I was able to really focus on the logistics and answer some of these questions that we're going to answer today. But me personally, I was looking at other people who were doing this for those answers, and that person was you, mostly, which is cool.
So
cool to sit here now.
Yeah, what were your concerns going into that project before
I
leaving?
think number one, it was safety. You know,
It's a big question mark, isn't it?
yeah, just like what are we getting into? You know, like is this idiotic? You know, and aside from that, kind of just the logistics of how, you know, like how much did it cost was, you know, a big thing, and no one was really able to answer that question, and I'm not sure if I'd really be able to answer that question either because it really varies on what you're doing and all that, but kind of just the feasibility of, you know, the logistics that go into living in a vehicle, and you know, how is it crossing borders? You know, like, you know, just all that little stuff.
Because you hear horror stories all
Totally,
the time, and people
totally.
expect to have to go down there and have something happen, or
Right.
yeah. So
Yeah. Well, and you're exposed. You know,
Yeah.
like you you're on the street a lot of the time. You're living in your vehicle, and it's different than traveling out of a backpack and staying in hostels or going down and staying in hotels or doing family stays. Or
you're really amongst it, aren't you? You're living on the street with these people, and you don't always know what these towns are like when you arrive. You know, everywhere's foreign to you, everywhere's new to you, so you kind of have to like develop kind of an intuition, like an instinct.
Absolutely.
Do we have a good feeling here? Is this safe? But I guess like the first problem we should talk about is the borders. You know, it seems fairly straightforward. People cross borders all the time, and that's kind of where I came to it from. I was like, other people have done this. It can be done. That shouldn't be a barrier. But it is a little bit of a headache, and sometimes there's issues. Did you ever run into any issues crossing borders going down to South America?
I think that with borders, every border was really, really similar in that there was always, you know, a set of things that you had to do, but then every border was also slightly different. They had one thing that you just couldn't really anticipate, you know, and so you had to kind of just go into it knowing that things were going to take a while, that you're probably going to have to go run around to a few different places. It was probably going to be a little redundant sometimes, but that at the end of the day you would get through, you know, because there was never a border that we weren't able to get across, you know, and you don't really ever hear of people never being able to cross the border. That doesn't happen very often. So
apart from when I tried to go back to the USA and
in the USA we have slightly different.
We're talking about like Central and South America borders where things are a little looser, but like sometimes there are some borders in the world where, you know, you need your paperwork in order.
Well, and I think that's a big thing with all of these is going into it with having, like, if you can do anything to expedite the process and just make it easier on both yourself and the people that you're working with, whether it's a border agent or whoever, is having your paperwork, you know, having your passport, your entry, you know, whatever they gave you when you enter the country is always a little different, but having all that stuff together and organized. And then having copies of everything, because you're going to have to make copies of absolutely everything. And most of the time, these border towns are going to have little people or little stands where you can make copies and stuff like that. Sometimes they don't, and then in those situations, you got to go all the way back into town or you know whatever. And so having copies makes everything just a lot faster, and just being nice, you know, being patient, and just knowing that it's going to take a while, you know, and being okay with that, being cool with that.
Did you ever see that at some borders there's like the kind of like border touts? People were like coming up and saying, "Hey, amigo."
Oh, like, right, like AIDS or whatever. Like, I'll help you get through. Like,
well, they don't give you AIDS, but I mean, it depends what place you get with them.
Right. No, I get it. There was a lot of that, and I think we did. Sometimes they're really pushy, and sometimes it's just like, all right, you know, like fine. One kid let us through, and that was great because it was really strange. I can't remember what border it was. I think it was Honduras and Guatemala. We were coming up to the border, and there was just like this massive amount of semi trucks just backlined up, next to each other, and like we couldn't really get through. And this kid was like, "I can get you a way through," and we were like, "All right, great." And he found this little route like through this maze of semi trucks. I actually put a little tiny scratch on the side of my van trying to navigate these tight corners in between these semis. And in that case, I was really happy to, you know, have him there. But a lot of the times it would be like, I don't know, I know how to do this. I'm cool. I really appreciate it. I think that a lot of those people expect you not to speak any Spanish, and I speak Spanish would have made it a lot easier for me to do that. Whereas if I didn't speak the language, paying that little surplus to make it that much easier, I think is worth it. Totally.
Yeah, I've heard reports from people that have gone through the borders and they pay for the guys to do it. And one of the advantages is that it gives them some work.
Totally.
And two, if you find the process a little overwhelming, then they do guide you through it. So it's definitely an option. I don't really like negotiating, and you know, I try to avoid that.
If I can avoid it, then I absolutely will.
So I always just went for the process, and it was fairly straightforward.
And you always have to be a little bit mindful too of the fact that, you know, they're whenever you're dealing with money and, you know, documents and stuff like that, there's a huge chance of you getting ripped off. You don't want to give your passport to somebody, obviously, and have them, you know, because you could. I think a lot of the times people play when you get screwed over, it's people playing on your ignorance or your kind of just obliviousness to a situation, and they'll say, "I need your passport," and then you give them your passport, and they never come back. You know, that stuff happens, and so I think you still have to be careful with, you know, how you do it. But I think that if people are around, I think that's a great way to get through faster. Yeah.
So having documents in order, that's definitely a good tip. I kind of learned that on the way and just start carrying photocopies with me, because you can do it most of the time when you're there, but it's just easier and makes it faster, right?
I lost my entry form in, I think, Honduras, and it was such a hassle to like just not have the thing that they need and, you know, not really know what to do. They didn't really even know what to do, and eventually they were just like, all right, you know, fine, get out of here. But yeah, just having everything together makes everything so much easier.
Let's talk about money at the border. Often you'll need to change money. I found that changing money with the touts at the border was actually really good.
Yeah.
I didn't have any problems.
Man.
I double checked the money, and the exchange rate I got was better than what I could have got at the
I've gotten
bank.
screwed over with so many fake bills in the past.
Really?
However, every time that happened was years ago. The last time down in South America with Vanajeros, I don't think we really had too many issues with fake bills at all, which is really cool, because then it makes it a lot easier to, when you don't have to worry about fake bills, you can change with anybody. But when you're worrying about fake bills, then you just have that in the back of your mind all the time, because you don't want to, like, because sometimes they're really good, but then you go to a restaurant or grocery store and they won't accept it because it's fake, then you're screwed, you know. And so I always just have this, I change at banks most of the time, because I'm, for the most part, nervous. But if I'm in a country that is not known for having fake bills, then yeah, of course I'll change with people on the street, because it will be cheaper, and, you know, it helps them out a little bit too.
It definitely helps to get the currency of the country you're trying. Like, say you check out of one country, it's usually the process. If you get to the border, you check out of one country, and then you start the process to check into the next. And sometimes they only accept their local currency, so it's hard to get the currency beforehand.
True. And then so you're forced to do it then and there. I have a habit of asking the border agents if fake bills are an issue in that country, because that's idea. Like right then and there they'll be like, yeah, there's a ton of fake bills, and then I'm a little bit more wary. And if I have to change it on the border, I can at least like get an understanding of how to identify that fake bill or whatever, because I mean, we're traveling on a budget, you know, every dollar counts, and like I don't want to lose any money on something that's stupid, you know. But yeah, like you said, sometimes you're forced into changing right then and there because you need to pay a fee or whatever and stuff.
Let's talk about paying fees. And often I've been at borders and they've asked me, like, you need to pay $3 to get in to finalise this paperwork.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes they ask you for money when you don't need to pay that fee, but they ask you. Did you ever have issues where they told you, like, because you've told me before that there's been times where they're like, you need to pay for this, and you really don't need to.
Yeah, you don't need to, and often it's just the border person working at that time asking for a little bit of money. You can give them the money if you want, but I generally ask them for a receipt or somewhere in writing that it says that this is a fee I have to pay.
If you can before going to a new country find out what the cost for going in is, or what fees you can expect either from other travelers or somewhere online. Sometimes it's hard online because sometimes not all that information is online. It helps because then you know going into it if someone's pulling your leg or not, when they're like, you have to pay $50 for this or whatever. When you're like, wait a minute, I heard that this was free, then you can, it's a little red flag that goes up at least.
I'll tell you a story about when I tried to do that one time. I was so sure that you didn't have to pay. I was trying to get across Honduras. I was only going to be there for a few hours.
$30, $25.
Yeah, and I was like,
this,
you're driving across this country, which is kind of, no offense to Honduras, it's a beautiful place, but it's kind of in the way when you're trying to get somewhere, because it's a little strip that goes across the bottom part.
On the bottom, America. Yeah, absolutely. I was worried about having to pay again because
Yeah, so like I was trying to get from, where would it have been, Nicaragua to El Salvador. And I had to spend a few hours in Honduras driving across the country, and I had to pay $30-something. And so I said to the guy, like, the same thing. I was like, I don't mean to be offensive, all in Spanish, but sometimes people ask me for money that I don't need to pay.
Right.
So if you could just show me somewhere that it's written down so that I know it's legit.
Sure.
And he completely took offense to it.
Right.
And I was being really polite. And he said, sorry, I'll get that for you, but you just got to wait for me to serve everybody else. And everybody else took about 6 to 8 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, until he finished his shift, and then the woman came. He said, my supervisor will be here in a minute just to help you. And all he was just making me wait until it was a change of shift. And then I got through in the evening. But by that point, obviously I was like, take $30, please.
Right. Yeah, I remember that. I remember we paid $30 because we spent some time in Honduras. And it was surprising because a lot of borders are free or cheaper than $30. $30 was the most
That's a lot
expensive
of
one
money
that we
Yeah, same.
and we were only it was only a few days later that we were crossing over that little bottom part when crossing into El Salvador, and I tried to show them, I was like, look guys, I just paid this a few days ago up there, you know, but still it had nothing to do with time. It was more that you left the country and came back in, and yeah, I remember that. But I loved Honduras. Honduras was a great country.
I did run into a few troubles at borders. I spent a night in Guatemala. I didn't cancel my car. The process, like you said, is different for every country. And in this particular country, coming into Guatemala, I had to register my car. I think they even gave me a stamp in my passport, which covered a whole page. That's really important, by the way, guys. If you're going to travel through the Americas or any long distance, it's important to take care of your passport. When you hand it over, make sure you tell them, put the stamp in the corner, because otherwise I'll put it in the center of the page and you will fill up your passport and be stuck in El Salvador for 6 weeks like I was, or some other place. But take care of that. Guatemala, they put a full page stamp in my passport, and when it came to the checkout process, the lady didn't fill it in properly or didn't take the paperwork, and I just trusted that she knew what the process was. And when I came to come back into Guatemala later, I actually ended up having to sign the car over to my travel partner in their name in Guatemala.
Right.
Just to get the car re-registered for the road.
How is that with the car going through borders? Like, do you need to keep registered? What's the process for getting? What's
I
the
think
paperwork?
having your title with you is get your title laminated. I'd never got my title laminated. I actually had, with the van that I went down with last time, I had 2 titles because I thought I lost my title, so I got a replacement. And so it was an identical title, it's just the title number was different. So I used the one that was replaced as the title I'd give down to everybody. And you unfold and fold it up so much that it gets to be a little fragile, but that is your number one thing that you need anywhere is your title. So get your title laminated for sure. And have a ton of copies of it. But aside from the title,
insurance, how was that?
Insurance too. But most countries, that's a good question. Every country would offer insurance at the border that you could buy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you could buy. In a lot of countries, that was the cost. That was the the $30 for Honduras or whatever. A lot of the times, that was for a temporary insurance that you'd have for for the time of your visa.
Sometimes it was quite affordable. I think I paid like $8 coming in Costa Rica.
Totally. Yeah.
So that's I actually paid a few dollars in Panama too, because it was compulsory and because it was available at the border.
Right.
And I needed it. I backed into a car there. So.
Are most of them compulsory to have insurance?
Yeah, it's required.
It is.
Yeah, some of them it's not. Like Mexico, you don't need insurance.
No.
Yeah, you can get by without paying it in a lot of them. But I've had police ask for insurance.
Oh, really?
Totally. In countries, definitely.
And that just covers you for an accident
Yeah, it's not going to cover anything on your car. It's just
the other person.
liability on the other person. Yeah.
That's nice to have as well.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. They asked for it for Mexico when we went down. When we crossed over, they asked for ours. And something that one, Mexico, I had to get ahead. I was told I had to get ahead of time, but when I got down there, I did see that there were places at the border. But I got it online. It was pretty easy. So.
And quickly, just going back on the border crossing, did you ever come across any times where you needed to bribe people for? Did you get any?
I never bribed anybody.
You must have had invitations to bribe, though. People were like, you must have seen it. Like, this guy's looking for a bribe.
Invitations to bribe for sure. One time we got pulled over coming into Cancun, and we're driving, an 80s VW van, and we're coming into Cancun, which is known for, a place for, Americans that come down and party, do a bunch of drugs or whatever. And so they, I think, just knew that we had something in the van. We didn't. Luckily, we had absolutely nothing. So we were totally cool. But I think we sat there for maybe an hour and a half while he tore apart absolutely everything. Obviously,
he just pulled you over on the side
He just pulled us over. Yeah, it was just you get stopped all the time driving through Latin America for people to check papers and stuff. And this is the only time that they didn't just let us go by. They stopped because they obviously wanted either us to bribe them to stop or to find something, and then us to bribe our way out of the situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were just they came to. He found our cigarettes, and he's like, "What are these?" They're cigarettes. But he didn't find anything and let us go begrudgingly. But that was the only
That's, I think, another major concern for people is the boys in blue. You know, like the police aren't always operating within the law. Like in Chile, they're really good. I think outside of Chile, through South America, it gets worse the further away you get. And we got stopped a lot by the police, checking for papers. We got stopped by the military. Anywhere up the Pan American Highway, like on the route north, the cocaine route north, you know, there's a lot of drugs and arms checks.
It's guns. They're looking for guns.
Yeah, and because you see it, right? Sometimes at some of the borders, they'll show pictures of what they've confiscated. And one thing I noticed in common was all those pictures were from large vehicles, like gas tanks hollowed out in big semis.
Totally.
You know, not tiny little VWs going past.
And so in Colombia, an interesting little story. We were in Colombia, and at the end of each month, they would run out of gasoline. There just wouldn't be enough gasoline to go around, and so people would and it was illegal to fill up tanks in reserve, because that would just make it so that people would run out of gasoline earlier. That they would all run out of gasoline earlier, and they would. We were at a gas station and saw a big semi get pulled over, and the cop was pulling barrel after barrel after barrel of gasoline out from underneath him, and arrested the guy, and because he was just filling up gas and then reselling it. But it was actually really inconvenient because nobody told us about that, so we ran out of gas. The whole plan for the four of us was to get to Ecuador. We were so excited to get to Ecuador, and we were so close. We were in southern Colombia. We were going to go the next day, but then we ran out of gas and had to wait a week because there was nowhere to fill gas.
That's not a problem that you would get up here, I don't think.
It's just a good example of having to be open to, like with the borders, like I was saying with the borders, just completely, just being open-minded.
Yeah, but that's not a problem. Like you said to me yesterday, when you break down or you run into troubles, you've already got your house there. Right. Everything's fine. Yeah. Like say you park up and you go explore the different place.
Exactly. The idea of driving versus flying or taking buses is to be able to spend time in between, to be able to really explore the places in between destinations. And if you get a flat tire somewhere, if your engine blows somewhere, if you run out of gas somewhere, whatever, those are obstacles that you can see not as obstacles but as opportunities to explore that place that you find yourself in that moment, you know, and that's a really cool thing.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I noticed that, like I said, the majority of vehicles that were being pulled over for arms and drugs were huge vehicles. And so I quickly identified the fact that they were looking through my tiny little camera bag, which couldn't contain an AK-47, or any substantial amount of drugs. They were looking for something that they could use to bribe me. Right. They were looking in tiny containers for
just a little bit amount of cocaine.
Yeah, a little bit of weed or something, so that they could say, right, you're in big trouble. You've got to give me some money, because there's been a precedent for that. They've found it before and they've bribed tourists before, and for the most part, I just kind of you have to facilitate them. I've got pulled over so many times driving my VW. It's just a absolute beacon when I was going through Mexico with 6 surfer boys, all hair blowing out the window, 8 surfboards on the roof.
They're like gold.
Yeah, they would literally pull me over. I had a few techniques for it. I actually experimented with the different ways that you can speak with the police. I've tried getting angry. For the 8th time in one day, I got pulled over and I was trying to get somewhere, and it was only a few hundred miles.
Why not try some different ways of going about it?
Yeah, literally. I said, this is ridiculous. I got pulled over half a mile ago. Why? It's supposed to be random. Why? Just frustrated, and it's the worst thing to do. So I'll clearly state the worst thing you can do is throw your toys out of your pram. Don't lose your temper. Because after that, they were knocking on the tubes underneath and all the underneath to see if it was hollow. Totally. They were ripping up my floor, which is nailed down. I was like, dude, I haven't got any drugs in there just because the car's from Chile,
I found I think a lot of the times because we got stopped all the time too, and a lot of the times you hear that it's good to just pretend that play dumb, pretend like you don't speak the language, and I think that probably does work a lot of the times, but I do speak Spanish, and I think that it worked to my advantage most of the time to be able to answer all the questions, be nice, tell them exactly where I'm going, what we're doing, and I can see that they'd be surprised, it'd catch them off guard, and they'd be like, oh, well, okay, and let us go, and that worked a lot of the times. I did, not on the Vanajeros trip, but I did have to bribe, I was in Colombia, and I was 18, and I was traveling around for a while, backpacking. It was Thanksgiving, and we were in Parque Tayrona in the northern part on the Caribbean coast, and I had some weed with me because I wanted to go smoke weed on the beach. It was Thanksgiving, you know, you wouldn't have expected this national park to be, you know, have a security checkpoint with the military checking you harder than, you know, I've been checked at airports. And so, of course, they found my weed. And I was so stressed out. You know, I was stressed out. I was like, man, this sucks so much. And they were just like, we're going to deport you. You know, like, this is bad. You know, this looks really bad for you. And I was just like, man, this sucks. But they kept talking about it over and over and over. But they weren't doing anything. And then there for like 15, 20 minutes of them telling me how bad of a situation I was in. And I was like, oh, that's right.
They want to bribe.
I'm supposed to bribe these guys. I completely forgot about it. But I was so broke. I was just out of money. And I had, you know, like the equivalent of like $10. They're like, we want $20. And I was like, oh, guys, I got $10. I'm leaving the country tomorrow. And they're like, fine, get the fuck out of here. But then they gave me my weed. So I was able to go to the park and smoke my weed.
Yeah, the police are good like that. They're always looking for a bribe.
Right.
I tried the speaking Spanish thing to them. I found that more often than not, that engaged a conversation which just took up too much time. Like, they'd see my Chilean plates, then they'd be like, where are you going, where are you coming from? And like, it was
that's an element that I didn't have to deal with, having a South American vehicle.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother level of questions that.
Yeah, so I think maybe that brought us more. You know, I've had policemen in Alaska pull me over or come over just to chat. Like, oh, that's a cool van. What's the story with the plates?
The first time I got pulled over in South America on the road, like actually not a stopping point, but actually like pulled over. We were on the highway going down Mexico on the paved highway, because in Mexico you can go on the paved highway or you can go on the paid highway the paid highway that is like really nicely paved, not a lot of traffic. You blast through, or you can go like through towns on, you know, the not as nice road, but much more interesting because you're going through town and stuff. But we were on the we were trying to go fast. So we were trying to pick a friend up from the airport, so we had to get to Mexico City quickly. And a cop pulled us over, and we were like, oh shit, you know, getting our paperwork together. And he just came over, and she's like, where are you guys from? You know, like, what are you guys up to? You know, and we were just like, he was just curious.
Yeah.
Really nice guy. Yeah. Welcomed us to Mexico. Told us to have a good time. And
I'll tell you, I'm actually going to make a video about the ways I dealt with police, because I recorded all my interactions.
Oh, cool.
And I recorded like the different approaches. I tried not speaking Spanish.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
I always say no hablo españolio,
right?
Like, which is wrong.
That's pretty good.
And it makes me look like a fool. And so they're just like, I'll just get out of here. And most of the time, that was the quickest way to end the conversation.
Yeah.
You know, they'd be like, you just went through a traffic light, and I'm like, sprechen Sie Deutsch? You know, even if they speak a little bit of English, it doesn't go very far. And I'm like, sorry, I don't really understand. And I found that was the easiest way. Like,
I've tried to backtrack. I've tried to like start with, you know, speaking Spanish, and then I can see it's not working, and then backtrack to being like, I don't understand you. And sometimes they're like, you know, okay, but yeah, most of the time they'd be like, you were just talking to me.
Yeah. I've had a policeman tell me that I broke the law, I went through a light or something, which may or may not have been true, I'm not sure, and stand there and tell me I need to pay like $500 fine.
Yeah.
And I've literally played him so that he's standing in the bright sun and it's like 30 degrees Celsius outside, like 100 degrees Fahrenheit or something. Yeah. And just stood there and waited until he got too hot, and just seen the sweat beading off him, and just been like, I don't understand. Sorry.
Yeah, it's just waiting game. Who's in the break
first?
first?
I have got all day. I don't have to be anywhere.
Exactly.
Like, how long do you want to wait for?
The one situation which really did suck was we were driving through Nicaragua and got stopped by the police, and Madison and I were in the front seats. Joel and Parker, the other two people traveling with us, were in the back seats, and we didn't really ever wear the seatbelts in the back seats, but we wore seatbelts in the front seats a lot, especially because we get stopped all the time. And so we were definitely wearing seatbelts, but he poked his head in back, and I don't know if he really saw that they were wearing seatbelts or not, but he claimed that nobody in the car was wearing seatbelts and gave us a big ticket. But we also saw, like, there was a line of people in front of us as we drove up to this stop, and everybody, they were giving tickets to absolutely everybody for one reason or another. And he asked for my driver's license, so I gave my driver's license, and then he's like, as I was handing it to him, he's like, okay, I'm going to keep this until you pay it. You have to go into town and pay this ticket, and then I'll give you your driver's license back when you bring the receipt back for the ticket that you paid. And I was still holding it, and so I tried to pull it back from him. I was like, no, I'm not going to give you my driver's license, you know, like, you're not going to be able to keep my driver's license. And we were like playing tug of war, like in the window with it, and he was getting really angry and stuff, and he reached for his handcuffs, and I was just like, all right, take it. And then we went into town to pay the fine. And at that point, I was like, okay, like, he's asking, should I try and bribe him? I was like, I just said, is this something that I can pay for now? Can I pay you this amount to, like, and not have to go into town, because we're not going that direction. We just came from there. You know, it was like an hour away or something like that. He's like, no, you have to go pay it. He wasn't looking for a bribe at all. They were just giving out tickets, and, you know.
So
that's a good point. Sometimes
so I went into town, but the difficult part was he was right in between two towns. So we went into one town, and they're like, we have no idea who that officer is. You know, looking at us like we're idiots. And we're like, okay. And then so we went to this other town, and they were like, yeah, okay. And so I paid it there, and then we went back to his stand, and he wasn't there anymore. He had switched posts.
It totally sounds like what would happen.
And so we were like, where can we find this officer? And they're like, oh, we have no way of getting in touch with him. You know, it's not like we have radios that we can call him on or anything like that. You have to wait here until his shift is done, and he might come back to the station after work if he doesn't go straight home. And we were like, are you kidding me? And so we sent, I stayed at the station while Madison, Joel, and Parker literally walked the streets looking for this police officer.
Wow.
And I waited there for hours, and he finally came back, and I was just like, you motherfucker, you know, here's the receipt. And he was just really like cold about it, and was just like, yeah, here's your license. And, yeah, and that was really dumb. It was a whole all day, like, you know, 6-7 hour thing trying to find my license. And that would have really sucked, because we were still on the way down. And so I was saying earlier that your title is important, but your driver's license is important too. In some countries, some countries don't care whether you have a driver's license or not, but some countries really do. You know, and so having that is a good thing. You know,
people wonder why it takes so long to drive down to South America.
Yeah, exactly. Shit like that. Yeah.
So to wrap up the whole bribe thing, because we need to go on a break.
Okay. Right.
Sometimes you have no choice but to pay the bribe. Like in that situation,
sometimes
it's
you
like
have no choice.
You know, they're going to give you a fine. You're going to have to go. You can't
I
talk
go
your way
down
out
fighting.
of it.
I go down fighting.
Yeah. I have too. But I mean, sometimes I don't know. I think that one of the big things you have to remember is that you can't really just. It's really easy to have this really negative connotation with law enforcement when you expect everybody to be just super corrupt and have to bribe everybody and stuff. But it's hard to travel around when you don't trust anybody. You know, your lab just fell off.
Oh, that's why it was weak. I was looking at
It's hard to be in a place and not allow yourself to be open to people. You know, if you're closed off to everybody, then you're not going to have a good time. So you have to give people the benefit of the doubt a lot of the times. And sometimes you got to bribe somebody. A lot of the times you don't have to. You just got to be nice and cordial and trust that, you know, they're good people and, you know, let you on your way.
Here's the thing about bribes. I've never paid a bribe in the 8 years that I've travelled all around the world.
Yeah.
But I've been very close to paying a bribe. If you find yourself in a situation when you do have to pay a bribe, and that does happen.
Like if I have weed on me and they're gonna either arrest me or you know.
Like if that situation happens, just so people know, the quicker you can pay that bribe, the cheaper it will be, and the faster you'll get out of trouble. Because if you are arrested by one officer, then he takes you to the station. Now you have to bribe the officer and the person that's at the station. And if you get into a cell, now you have to bribe a whole bunch of people. And if you get into jail, Jesus Christ, I hope you've got a lot of money.
No, you don't want to be stuck in Latin American jails.
Hell no.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to go for a quick break and we'll be back.
Cool.
Guys, thanks for watching. We hope you found it interesting. We would have really liked to have been able to share these stories with you personally around a campfire, but this is the best we can do.
That would have been nice, wouldn't it? In part one, we were discussing the crossing of borders and the police and corruption. So in part two, we'll be discussing the banditos, how we stayed safe away from the dodgy people that we met or saw on the streets. So be sure to check out part two, and don't forget, guys, if you've got any tips and advice, leave it in the comments, or even any questions, because we want this to be something that contributes towards the van life and travel community. Thanks again for watching.